Christian parenting. Before we start today's episode, I'm excited to tell you about the chance you have right now to help keep So You're Having a Baby going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. And that's by giving a donation to christianparenting.org. So You're Having a Baby is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month. Besides producing podcasts like So You're Having a Baby, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like you become the perfectly imperfect parents God created you to be. So today, text CP Give to 474747 to make a generous donation. That's CP Give to 474747. When you do, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, full of great parenting resources like identity cards that encourage your kids about who they are in Christ, the Marked by Prayer journal, and a $100 Amazon gift card, and our very own A Parent's Guide to a New Baby. You can set aside perfection and grow into the perfectly imperfect parent you were made to be. I know you want to share this message of hope and freedom to more moms and dads, so please give generously today by texting CP Give to 474747. That's CP Give to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Christian Parenting is 100% donor-funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So thank you for giving generously today. So, you're having a baby. Today on So You're Having a Baby, we are joined by our dear friend Cynthia Yanof. Cynthia Yanof is a wife, mom, blogger, and the host of the Pardon the Mess podcast. She has a relaxed style of interviewing, combining her quick wit and sense of humor with a firm commitment to never taking herself too seriously. She loves Jesus, her family, foster care, and having lots of friends around her as often as possible. Cynthia is relatable, real, and a friend to all of us trying to just walk the parenting road in a meaningful way that's pleasing to the Lord.
And today we're chatting about what it's like to bring a new baby home through foster care and adoption. We often talk on this podcast about pregnancy, but realize that may not always be possible for everyone and may not even be what some people feel called to. Foster care and adoption are such beautiful, important aspects of parenting, and we'd be remiss to not have someone on to speak to what it's like to foster and adopt a newborn. So let's get started.
Well, Cynthia, we are so thrilled that you're joining us today to have this important conversation around bringing home a new baby through adoption. You have such a unique and amazing story with this, and I'm so excited for everyone to get to hear it. So thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Well, of course, and thank you for having me. In fact, this morning I was doing breakfast with my kids, and we were kind of talking about our day. And don't worry, they didn't care one bit about my day, but I went ahead and interjected what was happening today. And I was like, "Oh, I'm on this podcast." And they asked the name of it, and I told them, "So you're having a baby?" And they were like, "Gross! Aren't you too old to be talking about that?" And so I got a full vow of confidence from my family this morning. But thank you for having me. I'm excited. I love you too. I love that I get to do ministry with you. And so, yeah, a little bit about us is I work with Denison Ministries, and I don't remember my title. I should know this. I think I'm the lead spokesperson or something like that for Christian parenting, but I just get this awesome benefit of speaking into parenting and hosting a podcast and working with you guys. And so I've been with the ministry about 4 years and almost 5 years, I believe. And then I am married to my husband, Mike. We've been married 20 years. We dated 7 years. So we can have another podcast someday about why you should never date someone 7 years before you get married. It's a very long time. And we have 3 kids. We have a daughter, Kate, who is a senior in high school. We have a son, Brett, who is an 8th grader in middle school. And we have a 5-year-old who is in pre-K. And so just to put that in context for everybody, in the fall of this year, when the new school year starts, my husband and I will have a freshman in college, a freshman in high school, and a kindergartner. So that's where we are.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, man. God bless. God bless.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's been so cool. It's often we talk to a lot of people, Cynthia, that we don't know as well as we know you. And so I'm really excited for the conversation today, just that we work together every day, but have known you for a long time and have gotten to also watch your kids grow to a degree and getting to know them as well. And getting to be at your house for even things like team gatherings and stuff like that has been really cool and great. And so I'm really excited for the listeners to get to hear a little bit about your family story, and specifically as we zoom in on adoption. And you guys have a fascinating journey with that. In a lot of ways, I think what can be a really encouraging journey as you're able to share what God has done in that space. And we know for a lot of people listening to this, a lot of our content for So You're Having a Baby is on, people that have a baby in a way that's, themselves, their DNA. And we really wanted the chance with this second season to talk about adoption specifically, because it's such an important way that I think we can exhibit the heart of God. And there's so much opportunity for families that, whether it's an intentional choice they want to make or they're struggling to have kids naturally, that it's a way that we can so embody God's kingdom in the earth. And I think your family has a fascinating story with that, and you have such a great perspective on that. So maybe as we zoom in on adoption specifically, tell us a little about your story, your adoption story with JB. Maybe start, around the beginning and share as much of that story as you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I would like to echo what you're saying. I think that as you're listening to this, instead of it being just maybe my story, our story of adoption, just be asking also the Holy Spirit to be speaking into your own lives, because I know there's no coincidences. We know that with the Lord. And so there's a reason you're listening to this. And whether that's you're at some point going to be called into adoption or foster care, or you have people around you that are going to be, maybe your kids someday are going to adopt. I just know the Lord, he just doesn't let these things go in vain. And so I would just say, I love to tell my story, but I love to see how God's using that story to propel people forward into what he's calling them into. And so as we do that, yes, our story is kind of an interesting one. My husband and I, again, having dated 7 years, you guys, you have plenty of time to talk about all things. And so we had talked a little bit about adoption before we were even married. And I kind of always wondered if maybe we were going to have some fertility issues, just because we both kind of said it'd be cool to adopt. We kind of had a heart for it. And so my husband did not grow up a Christian, became a Christian kind of when we were in law school, a little bit before that. But he also had that planted in him. And so we had our first 2 biological kids, and we were like, okay, well, who knows what's this going to look like? And after some time had passed, I just felt this gnawing on me that the Lord wanted something different. And I didn't know what that looked like. And it kind of intersected professionally for me as well. But I remember one day being in my law firm. I used to practice law, and I was on the 25th floor of this downtown Dallas building. And I just kept having this sense of holy discontent. And those are big words, big Christian words. And I really had heard them my whole life, but I wasn't sure what that meant until I felt it. And I had this sense of do you want something else for me, God? I just feel like you're calling me to something different. And I remember putting my head back in my chair, and listen, this is one of my more spiritual moments. There's so many that are not spiritual, so take it for what it's worth. But I put my head back in my chair, and I just said, Lord, whatever it is, whatever you're calling me to, I'll do it. I'll be faithful. And that was kind of the end of it. And over the next series of a couple of months into years, I felt led to leave the law practice. I ended up being a random call by Craig's dad, Jim Dennison, to work for their ministry. And the Lord started moving in the foster care area. And so my husband and I went ahead and started to get licensed, which is just a whole thing. If you're going to adopt, or definitely in foster care, it's a process. You don't know that your house is a death trap until someone comes and looks at it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, how did I raise 2 kids already in this place? But we were licensed, and it took about a year because we're slow, and I was dragging my feet, and I wasn't sure what this was going to look like. And then we were licensed. And fun fact, you guys, 5 years ago yesterday, our little JB was dropped off at our house at 4 a.m. And we got the call.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah, 5 years ago yesterday. We got the call at midnight and said...
I remember that day.
Yeah.
I remember it well.
I mean, I had just started working for the ministry. And again, This is I could spend 2 days on this and I won't. But God doesn't work in our timing. That could not have been worse timing for me to start a new job in a completely new ministry. My kids were older and in school, and never did we anticipate a baby. I mean, we had said we would do older kids. And so in foster care, and I mean this in the least callous way possible, but babies are kind of the high commodity. That's what people want when they do foster care. And so the fact we'd said we would do older kids, we thought for sure that's what would come in our door, and that there would probably be 20 or 30 older kids in our door in the first year. But We got a call at midnight that night, and the CPS office said, we've got a little boy that was left at a fire station, and would you be willing to take him? And so we prayed about it, and we called back and said yes. And he went through children's, and then they checked him out, and he was fine, and they dropped him off. And when I tell you guys, like, there's not it was a bottle and a diaper is what we got with this little guy. They said he was 4 months old, but he was actually 2. And that was the beginning of a really big journey with a lot of complexities, a very legally complex case, which is, the irony is not lost on me that 2 lawyers get a very legally complex case. But we never intervened. We just trusted the Lord through it. And it was tumultuous. And happy to speak into that. But at the end of the day, the Lord was really, really so good and gracious, and we were able to adopt him right before he turned 2.
Man.
Wow. Can you speak to just a minute about, walk us through like that first week, right? So you've had these 2 kids that are mostly grown, and you're far away from that baby stage as parents. And Rachel and I talk about, our boys are 4 and 2, and we love doing this podcast now, just being a little bit removed from that. But even for us, we have to like remember back even just 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, to think about Wells at that, real newborn stage, because it feels like that time flies by pretty fast. It's hard and you're immersed in it, but maybe it's the nature of being a little bit sleepless, or maybe it's the nature of it really is, almost just a series of months before it seems like they become toddlers, and it flies by so fast. But what was that like for you, going from having these 2 kind of grown kids, thinking you're even going to have, older kids in the fostering system that come to live with you, and then all of a sudden you're surprised with this baby and you have to get thrown back into that baby stage? Like, what did you feel like you were, you remembered and were jumping into and prepped for, and what were those lessons you were kind of relearning along the way?
Yes. I mean, there's so much to that, because like you said, you don't, I think even like when you have your first baby, right? You think you know what you're getting into, but you have no clue what you're getting into. It's such a learning and growing process. So I would say I had the benefit of having raised 2 kids, but I also knew what I knew and how hard it is that first year. And so when the baby was dropped off, I'm like, oh, wow, like here we go. And my kids were a little bit older. And so, we were playing select sports. I have super sporty kids. So we were doing select sports, and they had their life. And so I would say on a very practical level, it took a lot of adjustment for everybody, because my kids got a pretty good awakening that like, it's not all about you. And so we're going to have to forgo some things. We're going to miss some birthday parties, and we're going to do some nap times. And we're, a lot of those things that required a little bit of transition to getting into a baby. The flip side of that is this. One, I can't even tell you, within hours of this little guy showing up at our door, our Sunday school community group came, and we had everything you could ever need. And I promise you, I can say to this day, I have spent less than $100 on clothes for my little boy ever, because so many people still give us clothes for him and hand down stuff. Like, people just jump in and they do community with you. So I was so thankful for that. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm in this alone. I felt like I was just surrounded and covered, and my family was as well. But then I would say the other thing is, having raised 2 kids, I kind of know now, I know the hills to die on, and I realized that there's some things we're just not going to worry about. And I had older kids. And so, I read the What to Expect When You're Expecting, and I did the sleep training with my first 2, and it worked. And it was great. That was not going to happen with my third. And so it was nice to be able to relieve myself of that and say, listen, you really can't screw it up too much the first couple of years. You can make your life harder if you don't get him sleeping well, which is kind of what happened with mine. He didn't sleep well because he was on no schedule, because he lived in a car seat, because we were always on the go. But I think that there was just a sense of freedom, and also being able to say like, okay, I'm going to let go the things I need to let go. And if God can do what God did to get him from where he was and put him with my family, then he's going to cover him to sleeping, to getting to eating, food at the right time. Some of those things that maybe stress us out. So I think there was freedom in it too. But I say, my older 2 really did good in transitioning into it. I believe that the Lord, as he weaves us together in our mother's womb, I think that he wove a heart for adoption in myself and in Mike, but I think he did it for my kids too. And I don't mean that necessarily that they're going to be called to adopt. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But he planted that heart of service and love before they ever knew what was coming, before I ever knew. And it was so evident because it's nothing we could have done as parents, but it was so obvious that God gave them a heart of service and love for this little boy, whether or not he was going to stay. And so I just love that God just does that. He forms it in the fabric. And so, yeah, I would say the adjustment had ups and downs, but it was really, at the end, it was really great.
That's really cool. I feel like, I don't know, Brett and Kate are just awesome kids too. So it's like,
Aw.
you're so blessed and got so lucky with them. Because I feel like, I don't know, it was really neat to see the way that they cared for JB when he was little. Like I remember just seeing Kate carrying him around and almost like her maternal instincts of like caring for him were so sweet to see that. I felt like they just jumped right in, and that just to me speaks to, I don't know, y'all's level of parenting them and the way that, you know, y'all have invested in them. And because it just felt like they were just all in, and it was just really beautiful to see. Because I would think, I don't know, I imagine my boys, I don't know what, 10 years from now, and I'm kind of scared to think about maybe how selfish they could be or how self-centered or that sort of thing. Like it kind of makes me nervous, especially when like you're talking about like the hierarchy of like birth order. And like I think about Wes and I'm like, oh my God, he just literally thinks the world revolves around him.
Yeah.
Because he was my first. And so it was just kind of like you're saying, every little thing had to be perfect. We had to do everything right for him. He had to transition all the right ways with his nap schedule and transitioning from bottle to, feeding himself, finger foods. And I just obsessed over every little aspect of his world. And, it's like with each kid, every single one has to be a little bit more flexible. And so I just think even about JB being like so flexible, living in a car seat basically. But there's also like a very cool thing to me about that, like just teaching your kids that at a very young age, like, yeah, the world doesn't revolve around you, like, and we're a family. And so there's going to be give and take in every aspect of that. And family comes first always. And that's something like we've been trying to instill in Wes because he's like, this is my show. I want to watch this show right now. Or, he's very much like, well, if I want it, then I get it. He's 4. So
totally.
But that's very cool to hear, like, even just how you've invested in them and in their hearts in that way. But then also to see how naturally I feel like it looked from the outside that they transitioned into having a brand new baby in their home.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And first of all, I say go for it, Wes, because listen, the firstborns rule the world. And so, and that's not by accident. So many firstborns are the ones that they have it together and they're used to, they might be a little regimented, but I've got a firstborn that the whole world revolved around her as well. And so, I'm here to attest that she's fine and it's all going to be okay. But yeah, I think that flexibility is important. And I know your boys, and I know the parenting you guys do, and they're going to do just great. But, people ask me all the time, and I just want to speak in this a little bit, that they are concerned, like with adoption, like if you have biological kids, what would that look like? And I remember thinking that same thing. And I have the benefit now of 5 years later, being able to see how my kids have adapted. And yes, there's been those beautiful service moments. I will say there's negatives too. JB was asked the other day at preschool, his favorite song, I promise you, he said an AC/DC song. So there's that. I mean, when you grow up with much older siblings, then you get, let's just say you don't want your kids playing with my kid, probably because he's seen so much life. But I will say this, my daughter for her college essay, and don't anybody like doze off, I promise people, I'm just going to read you a tiny bit, but this is the best way I can encourage you on how God works through these situations in your kids. And it's nothing Mike and I could have done parenting. I mean, it's just all God. But she wrote her whole college essay, like when she was applying, on foster care and on her little brother. And this is one little section. If you're ever wondering, like, how will this look? I think this is a good way to see how God works in your other kids. And she said this, 623 days. This is how long my family fostered this little boy before adopting him. This time was marked by many ups as well as many downs. There were days I spent hours upon hours playing with this precious little boy. There were other days when I came home from school not knowing if he would still be at our house. I learned that the process of foster care is marked by uncertainty. But in the uncertainty of whether the baby stayed with us, I learned that tomorrow's uncertainty should drive what we choose to do today. We must love well, meet needs today, and make the most of every opportunity. Knowing this taught me the importance of living in the moment and using what limited time we are given to make a difference and help others today. People always tell me that adoption changed my little brother's life, but the truth is it changed mine. And that's just all God right there. That's just a testament to what it looks like. And so I would say when people say, how did your kids transition? How did that go? Like, all I can say is like, but for God, it's worked out well.
That's
so
incredible.
beautiful.
Brings tears to my eyes. Because I do think that is something that keeps people from fostering or adopting is, oh, well, how will it affect my kids and the birth order and all the things? And I think that can often be a hindrance for people to go down that road, even if maybe they do feel called to it, which is just really interesting to think about how, I don't know, I think Kate put it beautifully that like, no, it really changed my heart and my life and for the better. And I know this is goofy, but I watch This Is Us and I think about the kind of the same thing of like, I think about their family and how it changed adopting, what's his name? I can't remember, but just how it really changed and affected the hearts of everyone in the family. Yeah. And it was like, you think it's just gonna, it's just like a service project or something, but really it's like this huge transformation that takes place in everybody's heart.
Yeah. And I think about a lot of what I feel like God has been doing in my life personally across the last few months has been kind of helping me reconcile that hard and good aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
If just because something's hard doesn't mean equal bad. That things can actually be hard and good all at the same time. And that it's often, I think when you look at the story of scripture and the story of our human experience, that you can see that it's often in those things that are hard that God's able to show up the most. I don't know if it's because we're paying attention more or because we have more need. And so we're a little bit more reliant on him, but it's often in those things that are really challenging that I feel like I get the clearest picture of who God is and of his love for me and of what his kingdom is like. And you see that in the life and ministry of Jesus. Like you look at his life and ministry and it was not easy. You look at the life and ministry of the disciples and it was not easy, but you look at how abundant it was and how much at the same time they had so much fun together and how beautiful those relationships were and how beautiful the ministry was in their lives. And I think that's been something that I've been trying to get okay with is kind of embracing those things that are hard and challenging and not trying to perfect my way around all of those things and trying to, mitigate those things that are hard with the right decision making or whatever it is, but actually going into those seasons or moments. And I think adoption can be that. I think that it sounds like, Cynthia, your experience and from our other friends that have gone through adopting and fostering, that it's I've heard one person say like, oh, it was a cakewalk. It's just a total piece of cake. I've heard everyone has communicated how hard it is, but at the same time, they always say how good it is and how beautiful it is. And I think that's something that can be, what I'm hearing from you is even beneficial for our kids, if we go through that. And we have a blended family of kids that are naturally born and kids that were fostered or adopted, that can be a really beautifully hard thing for the entirety of the family and can ultimately bear a lot of fruit for the entirety of the family and how we can embrace that.
I want to share with you a very cool testimony from a listener like you. Meredith writes, "Your last episode, God is With You, spoke to me in such a powerful way. I desperately needed that truth and encouragement, and God really spoke through you in a mighty way through that episode. It was the word of grace and truth that I needed so much. I love all the episodes. We actually hired Sleep Little Lambs sleep consultants because of the sleep episode, and I'm so grateful for that resource. So I just wanted to say thank you for your ministry and for your support. It has meant the world to me. May God continue to bless you and your family and use you to speak life and truth and bear fruit for his kingdom. Meredith, the mama of an 8-month-old baby." Meredith is just one of the thousands of moms and dads who are being blessed every month through So You're Having a Baby. Did you know that this show is brought to you in part by our friends over at ChristianParenting.org? So You're Having a Baby is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month. Besides producing podcasts like So You're Having a Baby, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like you become the perfectly imperfect parents God created you to be. Today, I want to invite you to support this mission of creating more perfectly imperfect parents by giving a donation by texting CP Give to 474747. That's CP space give to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Every dollar you give reaches one more parent with trusted biblical guidance, so please give generously. When you do, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, full of great parenting resources like identity cards that encourage your kids about who they are in Christ, the Marked by Prayer Journal, and a $100 Amazon gift card, not to mention a copy of our very own A Parent's Guide to a New Baby. Christian Parenting is 100% donor-funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So today, if you've been impacted by this podcast, please make a donation to Christian Parenting by texting CPGIVE to 474747. That's CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org to reach more people like Meredith. Thank you.
As we're talking about this, if you could just even reflect on maybe what were those things that were really challenging for you and your family to walk through, whether it was through those seasons and some of the uncertainty of it, and at the same time, how in those hard experiences you saw God show up.
Yeah. You know, when you said that, thinking of reconciling that hard but good, at one point when we were going through this process, and this feeds into how difficult it was, there were several times where I had to pack up our little guy and all of his things because CPS was going to pick him up to take him to a relative or something. And so I was preparing for that. And listen, you guys, I'm that mom that cries when I drop my kid off at kindergarten. I don't know why. I'm not a crier, but for some reason I struggle with transition. So it's only funny, kind of, that God would call me into something, my husband and I into something where it's complete transition and goodbyes, which is so hard for me. Like, I don't even know how I'm taking a kid to college. Let's not even discuss that. But I remember one time we were waiting for a hearing and we were pretty sure this baby was going to be leaving. And I mean, we called it sunglasses days, where I'd wear my sunglasses all day, even in the house, because I just couldn't. I was beside myself. And I remember someone asked me in front of my kids, they said, would you do it again, knowing what you know, go through this process? And I said, this is hard. I don't know. And one of my children spoke up and said, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not right. And that's just it. That didn't mean it wasn't right. Didn't mean we weren't called to it. It was hard. And so I would say the struggles came in the unknown. Like everyone, I like to know what's in front of me. I like to have some control over the process, especially as a lawyer. I want to be involved in the process, I think. And I think God was very intentional in the case, in JB's case, because we did not get involved. We were called to stay out of it legally and to let him have control and let the Lord work at how he's going to. I think it was hard, and it remains hard. I think working full time, I think lots of people listening to this can probably appreciate that. It would be easy to say, like, I can't be called to foster care because I have a full-time job. I have 2 other kids. I'm too busy. And that's just not how God's kingdom works, right? He reconciles the hard and the good. And in the middle of that hard is where you see God more clearly. And, you know, I tell this story when people ask me about foster care, but when we first said we were going to do foster care and maybe adopt, we didn't know. That was not necessarily the goal, but our people who loved us and loved Jesus came to us, lots of them, and said, have you really thought this through? Have you prayed about this? Worried about us? And you'll learn about foster care. Everybody has the scariest story in all creation to tell you when you say you're going to do foster care. And so it's like, hey, you know, I saw 2020 where someone's foster kid tried to kill him, and you're like, oh, awesome. And so it's this whole balance of like people saying, are you sure? And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I went into foster care completely petrified, scared of what it was going to do to my family. I have these 2 healthy, normal, perfectly adjusted bio kids. What is this going to do? But I came out of foster care scared of who we would be if we hadn't done it, because we are changed people because of it. We know God in ways that we never would have seen him before. You can't take your bio kids into a CPS office and let them see kids with everything they own in a trash bag, waiting on parents that aren't going to come, or waiting with parents who are on drugs. You can't walk out of that situation and not know a different way. My kids have been in parts of towns that very sadly they had never been in before that time. They've seen things I had worked their whole life to shelter and protect them from, and they are better because of it. And so I would just say to you, like, jump in there in those places you're going to be called with your kids, in those places that you're trying to shelter them from, in those places where God shows up and says, hey, I'm pushing you in this direction. You're like, that is by nobody's standards a good idea. That's where he shows up. And that's just, I would say, the challenge of it. That's where I say, go with it. Let the Lord lead you. A quick story that I love about our foster care experiences right before this last hearing where JB was in Texas, the child will almost always go home. The goal is reconciliation, as it should be. But JB was probably going to go home. We'd had him a couple of years. We were, heartbroken. And it was right before Christmas. And you know how Christmas makes everything harder, right? Because it's beautiful and the tree's up and you just want it to be Hallmark. And it wasn't. And this hearing kept getting postponed. And anyway, long story short, it's going to be on a Tuesday. So Monday night, we were at a choir concert with my kids. Life's going on. I've got this baby. And I'm like, he's leaving tomorrow, probably. And this pastor that knew a friend of ours from South Dallas, from this amazing African-American church in South Dallas, he called me and he called my friend, who then called me and he said, I've been praying for this family. I've heard about y'all through some different people. Could I just come to your house and pray before this hearing tomorrow? And we were like, okay, you know what? I guess. I don't know you. Is that weird? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. So he came over that night. It was 9:00 at night. Our friends that knew him were all there with all of our kids. We were circled by our Christmas tree. He sat outside for about 10 minutes and he came in. And before he started praying, he said, Cynthia, Mike, I just want you to know, I've never done this before, but I know that the Lord has told me that we are not to pray for the Lord's decision tomorrow. We are just to thank him tonight for the fact that he has already decided this is your child. This baby was born and created to be yours. And there is no need for us to weep and cry and beg the Lord for favor in that hearing. It's already done.
Wow.
And I had this moment of like, whew, hope this guy didn't commit the biggest doctrinal snafu ever, because if the judge goes the other way tomorrow, everyone just heard that. But at the same time, like this instant peace. And I was like, okay. And so the next day, my husband and I are sitting at home. We sent our kids to school. They didn't want to go because they were afraid he'd be gone. But I said, listen, we've had a word from God, I believe. They called and the CPS worker said, against all odds, you're not going to believe what happened. And I said, yes, I will. And I said, they ruled that he's staying with us. And she said, you're about to adopt a kiddo. And here's what I love about this. Like, God spoke so personally into that. Like, to say to two lawyers, like, this is not of judges. This is not of court systems. This is my child and my will be done. And I just want you to all have that word. Anybody listening, that is God's plan for your family, for your kids, whether they're biological or they're adopted. This is his baby. This is his plan. And all those places that seem unknown or scary or that you want to step in and control, you don't have to. He's got it. He loves them. It will not look how you thought it was going to look or how you planned, but you can trust that he is good. And now, as I'm 5 years into this later, and I have a little guy that has some speech delays and probably some learning stuff, like, people say to me, are you worried about that? I'm like, no, if God could get him from where he was to where he is now, then he can teach him to talk. He can get him through it. And so I would just say, I don't even know, Craig, if I answered your question, but I just want everyone to be encouraged that, like, he is a God that is in the detail, and we know him better because of this journey. And adoption and foster care has been the greatest vehicle for me to see how God loves us and how he has adopted us into his family, that we are broken from the time of creation, but that he loves us enough to send his son to die for us and allow us to be adopted into his family. And how could I not just love the fact that he's allowed us to participate in that same thing on an earthly level with our kids? And so, yeah.
I get this picture as you're sharing that of just kind of fingers getting like one at a time opened just to kind of loosen the grip that I think I so often try to have on every situation in my life, but especially as it relates to my kids. And I think what I like hearing your story is that, you know, God's faithful no matter what our experience is. Like, his faithfulness never changes, but it often is, I think, those experiences where we get a window into his faithfulness that helps me take those fingers off slowly but surely of my own life and kind of loosen the grip on my life and give him more room to move and provide more peace in the midst of uncertainty. And I think there's so much opportunity, and it's often where I hear stories of faithfulness, not only where I see those in my own life, and I reflect back on them, but when I hear them in other people's lives, that helps me recognize that even if it's just for today, that I'm able to remember that. And for those that are listening to this, even just for today, that even just for today, we can kind of loosen the grip on our choices and decisions and experiences and let God be God and walk into those with more trust. And I think it's often an experience of peace that follows that decision. That's ultimately a faith decision to trust God, even in the midst of uncertainty. And I think what a beautiful thing for your family to get to experience of God's faithfulness, that not only would he, come through in a way that is so life-giving for your family, but would have the grace to speak into that situation the night before, a direct word that you guys need to hear, and would show up so faithfully to fulfill that word that he gave someone for you. And just love hearing that. I think that that's so beneficial. And regardless of the situations in their life, whether they are related to adoption or not, that all of us have things with our kids. Rachel and I are going through stuff with our kids right now that it's so easy for us to try to control and, kind of grin and bear our way through all of these scenarios to try to come through the other side in our own strength of what we need, what we wish these scenarios would turn out like. But I think there's so much opportunity to give more room to that and more space to kind of see God show up in the ways that only he can.
Yeah, I'm just really moved by that, Cynthia, because, just what I hear and what I see in your story is that, you had to learn to hold in tandem, deeply loving this child and giving him a sense of secure attachment and, giving your all to him, all the while you never knew if he would just be gone, and you would just lose him. And the trust that you learned from God in that season, it's like very intense, because I feel like so many of us try to go through life unscathed, to not experience pain, but you willingly and your family all willingly, put yourself in a place where you could experience like deep pain and loss, and said, this is worth it to us to love this child and give him everything that we have. Sorry, I'm like kind of like shaken up from it, because it's just such an intense, vulnerable place that you willingly stepped into to trust God and be obedient and be faithful. And I just think that is incredible to me.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And I just want everyone listening to, like, if you have that sense of like, well, these people are different or they must really love God to be able to do that. Yes, we really love God. But the fact of the matter is we're just normal people living a normal life with, a dumb dog that barks too much and a couple of jobs that take a lot of time. And like, we're just normal people, but like God has something for everyone. And it may be foster care, it may be adoption. The fact you're hearing this, I think it's something worth praying through. But I also think some of us are called to go next door and to minister to somebody. And some of us are called to whatever that is. And just know that God is so faithful in it. In our story, I just always go back to like, we know him better because of faithful obedience. Yeah. And so for someone who's listening and maybe you're going into adoption, considering it maybe from a place of loss, like you are having fertility issues or you're struggling. And I'm sorry for that. I am genuinely so sorry. And I think that's okay to be remorseful of that and to go into adoption that way. But I know God can redeem in that. And then for some that are just doing it out of obedience, like my family did, walk it well, walk it strong. You'll have those moments, but just, but whatever you're called to in parenting, I just look at my life and like, how far am I from practicing law to now, hosting a podcast and speaking into parenting, like least qualified to do the things that the Lord has now allowed me to do in ministry. And I just like, I stop all the time. And I have a sign on my wall I'm looking at right now, Esther 4:14. Perhaps this is the moment for which you have been created. And I know this is the moment for which I was created, that he called me and my family to this. And we never would have seen it. The verse before that in Esther, the verse right before that is where Mordecai says to Esther, like, if you don't do it, somebody else will, but you will have missed out. And I think that's the critical verse. Like, if we don't do what we're called to do, God's going to get it done. His will be done. He is sovereign, but we will have missed it. And I just want to like yell from the mountaintops, as weird as that sounds. I want to be like, come on, you guys, don't miss it. Whatever that is, it's not going to come without struggle, but don't miss it. And as you're raising your kids, raise these kids that are going to chase after the God things. I genuinely believe my kids, I think they hold things more loosely now because they've seen what it looks like to live out your faith. They see what it looks like to do what God calls you to do when it's hard and it's ugly and it's unknown. And they've seen me cry over his crib. I couldn't sleep a lot at night, and I would just sit next to that crib and just cry out to God and pray over that baby. I mean, they've seen that. And so that's my encouragement to everyone, is just trust the Lord in it. As you're raising these kids, is the more you're wanting to hold on and control and freak out when they don't make that team and storm the gates of the school when they don't get in the right classroom. Don't do it. Don't do it. God's got a great plan for you.
That's so good. So I think all of us are walking away from this conversation deeply encouraged around every facet of life and parenting. But for those that are specifically listening to this and they're feeling maybe their heart tugged to at least explore what fostering could look like, maybe even just draw a circle around that for a second, and then we can talk about adoption. Could you give us a picture practically of what it looks like to explore fostering?
Sure. I knew nothing about it. And so if you're listening and you know nothing about it, you're not alone. I live in the Dallas area like y'all do. And there was a church that had a class on foster care. And that's literally where I started because I had no clue. But now I know that there's Christian foster care agencies. Wherever you live, there will be one. And that's what we ended up going with, was a Christian foster care agency. But you can just call and ask questions. I would say reach out to people that maybe you know that have done that. I've written on it on christianparenting.org. I've written several articles on it. It also has a way to contact me. You can email me anytime, Cynthia at christianparenting.org. And I would love to pray over you and kind of help you, point you in the right direction. I have 5 or 6 women right now and families that are getting ready to start the foster process or getting licensed, that check in with me all the time. And so I would just say start there. Start simple. Start praying about it. If you and your husband or wife, whoever's listening to this, if y'all are not on the same page, then that's not your job to change minds and convince. You just pray for God to work, whatever that looks like. But everybody's got to be on the same page. It's a big endeavor. But yeah, I would say just look for agencies and foster care agencies. I heard the statistic one time that sticks with me. And it said that if every evangelical church in this country would adopt one child out of foster care, we wouldn't need a foster care system. And think about that. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I can't attest to the veracity of that, but if that's even remotely true, there's a whole lot of us that are called to step into this in some way. And so, when we started, there was 28,000 kids in foster care in Texas when we were doing this, and I couldn't walk away from that number. And so, I would say start praying about that. Do a little research. Look online. See what your state looks like. What's the foster care system look like? I know post-COVID, the need is immense, and I remember even we had JB going into the CPS office, and there would be kids in car seats on the desk when they were trying to figure out homes. And so I don't say that out of a place of like, you should feel guilty. I just say it from a place of there is a legit need. And so if the Lord's speaking that into your life, then just, start taking those basic steps.
That's so good. And then I know you guys went through foster care and then ended up going through this process of adoption with JB, which wasn't necessarily the plan as a start, but can you also give a window into what that process looks like to go through fostering to adopt and then adoption specifically, maybe on its own?
Yeah. So within the foster care communities, there's ways to do it where you can do just straight up foster care and you're not adoption motivated. And so that means you're just always going to do foster care, or you can do foster to adopt, which means you probably are adoption motivated, but they tend to give you kids that are closer to being an adoptable state, or you can do just straight up like I want to adopt, and those are kids that have already the parental relationship has been terminated. So there's different ways to get into it. We had decided early on, and I would say just like you decide before you enter the system where you're going to fall on that, because when you're already in it, it's really hard. Mike and I had prayed about it. And we were not going straight up adoption. We were going straight foster care. But we said if a child was in our home that became adoptable, we would adopt. We didn't want them to live with us and be attached to us, or them, whatever the case may be, and then not. And so that's where we were. And it just, the Lord clearly had this little guy for us, because it's the very first placement that ever, it just doesn't happen that way. The very first one in the door, never left. And that's it. But there's different ways to do it. And then the great thing is, and again, this is in Texas, but it's not expensive. If you're worried about the financial side, which I know is practical, it's not expensive to adopt. The actual adoption proceedings. My little one, because he's adopted out of foster care, can get a free college education at any state school. Now, I say that, and this kid will want to go to Baylor or some private school. I just guarantee that. But there's just all kinds of things that help you get through the process. And so do a little research, ask some questions. If you don't know somebody who's done foster care or doing it, find that person. You got to know that person, because I've just met the coolest people that are doing it, and they know so much, and just support them, even if that's not the direction the Lord leads you.
Wow, that's so awesome. So as we wrap up, what's an encouragement that you would tell a new parent who's either about to go into the foster care world, or even go into the foster to adopt, like you said, or just adoption, what's like an encouragement that you would give them as they go?
I would just say, what a great privilege this is going to be, and what a great journey. And it won't be the traditional way. And having done both sides of it, and I loved when I did it with my biological kids and reading the books and kind of knowing the plan and picking the hospital and all that kind of thing. And then I've done it on the flip side where, I had to take him to certain doctors through the state, and he was on Medicaid, and it wasn't what it looked like the first time. But I just would say that, like, it's such an adventure. It's so cool. It's just to see God blessing obedience is something that everyone should experience. And I believe he does that. I think he blesses obedience. And when you live in a way and you chase after the things that he wants you to chase after, then you're not disappointed. And so if you're living in a place of like, man, I just thought life was going to look a little bit differently, or parenting is not what I was hoping it was be, I would say step into that place of obedience and be encouraged, because God is so good in that. And, Second Chronicles 20, I love, read that chapter. I love King Jehoshaphat, and he's got this huge army coming at him, and it's not a winnable battle. And so he starts praying and fasting with all of his people. And at the end of his long prayer, he says, Lord, I don't know what to do, but my eyes are on you. And like that preaches. We could spend 2 days there. Like, I don't know what to do, Lord, but my eyes are on you.
Yeah.
That's my first encouragement. Whatever you're facing, adoption, foster care, whatever it is, I don't know, Lord, but my eyes are on you. Step one. And then step two is what God says in return. A little bit later, God says, the battle isn't yours, it's mine. And I think that's just amen and amen. The battle is not yours, whatever it is today, whether it's fighting through foster, thoughts of whether or not to foster or adopt, or fertility issues, or just a colicky baby, whatever you're facing, ultimately the battle is not yours, it's his. And so if his yoke is easy and his burden is light, then the things that are hard and that you're struggling through, you need to hold loosely. Give them back to the Lord. Trust him that he's got this for you. And so just be encouraged. I just want you to be encouraged. My story is not everybody's story, but God's story of faithfulness it's everyone's story. And I just want you to know that better. And so that would be my encouragement.
That's wonderful. Cynthia, thanks so much for having this conversation with Rachel and me, and for being able to not only go through this experience and say yes to where you felt like God was directing you and your family in the face of something that I think looking at you knew was going to be challenging, but also being willing to, through your podcast, Pardon the Mess, but also even here just with us and so many other conversations and articles you write, be willing to share that experience with other people to be able to benefit from as well, and do that so beautifully. So thanks for your time and for your willingness to do that with us.
Oh, thanks, you guys. I'm your biggest fans. You're doing great stuff. And let's have another one someday where I'd come on and just talk about all the ways we've gotten it wrong. Don't be deceived, people. There's plenty of that too. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening today. We hope that you were encouraged, maybe that you learned something new, and that, if God is speaking to you and you felt a tug on your heart, that you really would investigate into that more and just see what he has to say. So as always, we would love it if you would subscribe to our podcast so that every week that you're notified every Wednesday when we have a new episode come out. You can go to christianparenting.org to find our book, A Parent's Guide to a New Baby, because we know that parenting a newborn is real hard, but we're here to help.